Chan Wu stood at the edge of his office, 39 floors above the pulse of Seoul. The city blinked beneath him, electric and restless, but in here, there was only stillness. Floor-to-ceiling glass enclosed the room like a fortress of ice. Not a single item was out of place. No paintings, no clutter. Just the faint hum of the central air and the constant, almost reverent silence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Control. That was what he worshipped. He had clawed his way out of obscurity with the kind of ambition that made headlines. The son of a failed tailor and an absent mother, he'd built Kang Group from the ground up, through sheer brilliance, backbreaking work, and an unrelenting refusal to need anyone. Everyone calls him Mr. Arrogant, and he lives up to it. Rumors swirled like fog. He never dated, never lost a negotiation, never flinched, even when rivals tried to break him. The media called him the Iron Phantom, swollen with pride, deaf to wisdom, colder than the empire he worshipped. But what they didn't know, what no one dared whisper, was that Chan Wu didn't believe in anything beyond what he could see, touch, and control. God, faith, that was fantasy for the fragile. His empire was his truth. Spreadsheets were scripture. Balance sheets were holy. And yet, some nights when the city lights flickered across the glass and sleep refused to come, he would catch a glimpse of himself, just a man in a tower of silence, and feel something gnawing in the corners of his chest, an ache, a crack. But cracks, he told himself, were meant to be sealed. She arrived in his life with no warning and no apology, like the first breath after a storm. Eirene Daniels was not the type of woman anyone expected to be seated across from a Korean billionaire. She was vibrant, composed, deeply Black, and deeply unbothered by status. The outreach initiative she came with was hosting workshops across Seoul, and Kang Group had, at the insistence of one board member, agreed to fund a portion of it. Chan Wu hadn't planned to meet her, but somehow there she was, sitting across from him like she belonged there. He scanned her as she entered the room, long curls swept into a bun, dark eyes full of something he couldn't quite read. Peace, maybe. Poise. Mr. Kang, she said, extending her hand with easy confidence. Thank you for the support. I'm Eirene. You're the American, he said, his voice flat, eyes unmoved. I'm the believer, she replied with a small smile. The rest is just geography. He didn't return the smile. She didn't need him to. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met in a boardroom. She didn't defer, didn't dance around her words. And when she spoke of hope and faith and the goodness of God, she did so without hesitation, as if her soul had never known what it was to flinch. She irritated him and fascinated him. Their meetings were short, but she lingered, asked inconvenient questions, sat at the edge of his desk like it was hers. It was supposed to be a simple partnership meeting. A few representatives from Kang Group, a few from the Outreach Initiative, a few papers, a few polite bows, a few nods. And yet, somehow, the room felt tense. They were gathered in one of Kang Group's smaller conference rooms, all glass and steel, the kind of place where kindness went to die and efficiency was king. At the head of the table sat King Chan Wu, still a fortress in human form, perfectly tailored suit, expression cold as the untouched water bottle in front of him. Across from him sat Eirene Daniels, her hands calmly folded, her dark eyes steady, her presence like a stubborn lighthouse refusing to blink even in a storm. The discussion was about funding the next phase of the outreach program, expanding into underserved districts, building new learning centers, and hiring teachers. Soft-spoken Pastor Kim, one of Irene's colleagues, lifted his hand respectfully. Mr. Kang, he said, bowing his head slightly, We are deeply grateful for your company's generosity. We only wonder if, moving forward, perhaps the local community could have more input. Shared voices often bring greater fruit in these projects. The request was gentle, humble, but Chan Woo's gaze didn't soften. He set down his pen with a deliberate, almost surgical motion. We don't need more voices complicating the process, he said, his voice smooth and merciless. Your program will succeed because my company is funding it, and because my company knows how to deliver results. Silence spread like a crack across the table. Pastor Kim's hand lowered slowly. His shoulders drooped just a fraction. The other outreach members shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. And Eirene, she simply watched Chan Woo, not with anger, not with judgment, but with a deep, aching sadness he didn't yet deserve to be pitied with. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Proverbs 11:2. The verse stirred in her heart like a whisper from somewhere far older than this skyscraper. Chan Woo moved on without a flicker of regret, dismissing the meeting with a nod to his assistants. The outreach team packed their things in silence. Eirene stood last. As she exited the room, she caught one final glimpse of him, bent over his tablet again, as if nothing and no one outside his own mind mattered. 20 minutes later, Eirene wandered back toward his office, holding a steaming mug of green tea she had brewed herself. Security recognized her from earlier. No one stopped her. She found his door half open. Without knocking, she slipped inside. Chan Woo was still glued to his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. The skyline behind him was beginning to dim into evening. She dropped onto the leather chair across from him, casually crossing one leg over the other. "You know who you remind me of?" she asked, taking a slow sip of her tea. Chan Woo didn't look up. His voice was flat. "If you say Iron Man, I might forgive you." "Nope," she said, clicking her tongue against the rim of her mug. "King Asa." That caught him. His head lifted slightly. His eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Bible King," she said easily as if discussing the weather. "Started strong, trusted God, led with faith. Then he got rich, got proud, and stopped asking for help, not even when his feet were literally rotting." Chan Woo set down his tablet with a slow, deliberate click. "Are you saying I have rotting feet?" he asked, voice cool, but something sharp, something wounded, flickered behind his words. She smiled, not mocking, not cruel, just heartbreakingly steady. "I'm saying you're a stubborn King Asa," she said softly, "and your pride is starting to stink." A muscle in his jaw ticked. For a heartbeat, he almost laughed, but he didn't. Instead, he turned his eyes back to the window, the evening sun catching the hard planes of his face. "I don't need sermons," he said after a moment. "You don't," Eirene agreed easily. She stood, setting the mug down carefully on the edge of his desk. "You need a savior." She walked to the door without looking back. Before she left, she paused, her voice barely above a whisper. "God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble." James 4:6. And then she was gone, leaving nothing behind but a warm mug of tea and a seed planted where pride once thought it could reign forever. The silence afterward was louder than it had ever been. Later, that week, he found himself watching her from the corner of his eye during a charity event. She was speaking with a group of students, hands animated, eyes bright. Something about her laughter felt unshakably real, unbothered, unafraid. She moved through his world like she didn't need permission. At one point, she caught him staring. He looked away, but she walked right up to him anyway. "You ever get tired of pretending you're not human?" she asked, arms crossed, playful but pointed. Chanwu sipped his champagne and said nothing. She shook her head with a low chuckle, still stubborn. "You don't know me." "I don't need to," she said, her voice gentle now. "You carry your kingdom like it's all you have. But even kings fall. Even Asa." He stared at her for a long moment. Something in his chest stirred, faint, unfamiliar, and dangerous. What he didn't know, not yet, was that this woman would become the unraveling of his fortress. The breath that collapsed his walls, the whisper that brought his knees to the floor. The ache in his chest wasn't just loneliness, it was the beginning of surrender. Something shifted after the day she called him stubborn King Asa. Chanwu didn't acknowledge it, not in words, not even to himself. But it was there, a crack, hairline and dangerous, running deep through the fortress he had built around his life. At first, it was subtle. When Eirene spoke during project meetings, he no longer tuned her out the way he tuned out others. He listened, not openly, but with the silent weight of a man who was starting to realize that maybe not every voice was noise. Sometimes, after formal updates about the outreach initiative, he would linger, ask small, almost careless questions. How many centers are active now? What made you start this work? Why here? Why Seoul? Questions about her work, then about her heart, though he pretended they were casual inquiries. And Eirene never chased him. She never forced conversation, never pushed herself into his world. She simply kept showing up, steady, present, available, without demanding anything in return. When he asked, she answered. When he frowned, she smiled. When he grew sharp, she softened the blow with humor. Slowly, without meaning to, trust began to form in the spaces between their official meetings. He started finding excuses to visit the outreach centers. Site inspections, he called them, though no one had requested them. He walked the halls where children played and staff hustled with weary smiles, always catching glimpses of her, tucked away in an office, kneeling beside a child's desk, laughing softly over broken Korean sentences. And every time he visited, he left feeling strangely lighter. He even approved extra funding, quietly, anonymously, under the guise of reputation management. But it wasn't reputation he cared about. It was her work. It was the light she refused to hide. Somewhere along the way, they began exchanging texts. At first, strictly business. Chanwu, 8:14 p.m. Funding reports finalized. Review tomorrow. Eirene, 8:17 p.m. Copy that, Commander-in-Chief. Then, small jokes slipped through the cracks. Chanwu, 10:47 p.m. Board meeting tomorrow. Bring backup tea. Eirene, 10:48 a.m. Only if you promise not to act like King Asa again. Chanwu, 10:49 p.m. No promises. And then, unexpectedly, came tiny fragments of encouragement. Eirene, 7:03 p.m. Remember, strength without wisdom is a house built on sand. You're wiser than you know. Chanwu, 7:04 p.m. Not sure about that. Eirene, 7:05 p.m. I am. Eirene, 7:05 p.m. And so is God. He stared at that message longer than he should have. Saved it. Read it again when the nights were too long and the silence too heavy. Without ever defining it, Eirene became the one person he could breathe around without pretending. No masks, no boardroom armor, no empire to defend, just himself. Fractured, vulnerable, unseen by the world, but seen by her. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't hate being seen after all. It started with whispers, minor discrepancies in overseas contracts, numbers that didn't quite add up, emails gone missing, Chan-woo had seen plenty of corporate sabotage in his time, but not like this, not from him. Yoon Tae-jun had been more than a colleague. He was Chan-woo's right hand, the man he'd taken under his wing nearly a decade ago. Tae-jun had started with nothing but an internship and a stubborn spark in his eye. Chan-woo had liked that, seen something of himself in the kid. He mentored him, trusted him, made him family in every way that mattered. And now, files in hand, investigators murmuring under breath, Chan-woo stared at the impossible truth. Tae-jun had been feeding competitors classified documents for years, not for money, not for ideology, but for revenge. Quiet, calculated resentment born from years of standing in Chan-woo's shadow. "He said you never saw him," one of the compliance officers murmured, sliding over a transcript. "Said you treated him like a dog on a leash. He wanted to take something back." Chan-woo didn't flinch, didn't speak. He simply stood in the center of his office, shoulders straight, face unreadable. His silence was a steel wall. Inside that wall, everything was caving in. Later that night, he sat alone in his penthouse, still in his suit, staring at nothing. Not the skyline, not the empty glass in his hand, just the echo of betrayal ricocheting off every corner of the room. I raised him. I trusted him. I would have died for him. His phone buzzed. It was Eirene. Eirene, 6:07 p.m. Heard what happened. I'm outside. He didn't respond. 10 minutes later, she was at his door. She didn't wait to be let in. She walked in like a storm with calm eyes, like someone who didn't need permission to love someone hurting. He didn't even look at her when she entered. He just poured himself another drink. "I'm fine," he muttered. Eirene folded her arms. "You always say that when you're bleeding." He didn't respond. "You're bleeding, Chan-woo," she said, walking toward him, voice quiet but unwavering. "But you'd rather bleed in silence than admit you've been stabbed." His jaw tightened. "I don't need anyone." "That's your problem," she whispered. "You think needing someone makes you weak." "I gave him everything." "I know. I trusted him with my life." "I know." The silence stretched. Then his voice broke, barely a tremble. "And he hated me anyway." Eirene stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his arm. "That wasn't about you. That was about his own emptiness. Don't let his bitterness become your chains." He pulled away. "Leave." She held his gaze. "I will, but I'm praying for you, Chan-woo." He scoffed. But after she left, the silence felt heavier than usual. The media didn't wait. By sunrise, Kang Group was bleeding. Headlines screamed across every news outlet. Kang empire imploding. Fraud allegations. Rock billionaire's throne. Trusted advisor leaks. Over 10 years of confidential files. Banks froze assets. Shareholders panicked. Stock prices nosedived. By the end of the week, the empire Chan-woo had built with his own hands was shaking at its core. He sat in a room full of executives, silent as a dozen people yelled over each other. "Damage control. We need a statement. Now. Sell the non-core assets. Start restructuring. Sir, the Financial Oversight Committee is requesting a private audit." Chan-woo said nothing. His eyes were locked on the glass wall behind them, watching the rain as it traced lines across the city. His mind wasn't on numbers. It was on Tae-jun's face, the smile he used to wear, the way he used to say, "Hyung." It made him sick. He began working 22-hour days, refused help, micromanaged every move, every report, every damage control strategy. The team was exhausted, but no one dared defy him. He burned through solutions like matches, but nothing could undo the scandal. His name was stained, his company branded with distrust. And through it all, he refused to speak to God. Faith was still fiction to him. Eirene's calm voice haunted him, words she said playing over and over like scripture he never wanted to read. Even Asa started strong, but then he forgot who gave him strength. He gritted his teeth and buried himself in work. I can fix this. I can fix everything. But pride, once it sinks deep enough, doesn't bend, it breaks. It happened during a quarterly investor update, live-streamed, packed with reporters, analysts, and high-ranking stakeholders. Chanwoo was halfway through his opening address when the letters on the teleprompter blurred. He blinked. The room tilted. His legs wobbled. For a moment, he thought the lights had flickered. Then he collapsed. He woke up in a sterile hospital room. White walls too bright, the air too clean. His assistant was gone. No one else was there. Only the quiet and the doctor. It's not fatal, the doctor said gently, examining the chart. But it's progressive. Chanwoo frowned. What is? Your condition, the doctor said. Peripheral neuropathy. It's likely stress-induced. Your body is reacting to the sustained overload. Your nerves are inflamed, especially in the lower limbs. You're lucky it wasn't worse. Chanwoo sat up slowly. His feet were numb, heavy, like stone. Will it go away? Not if you keep living like this. You need rest. You need support. I need results. The doctor sighed, closing the chart. You need to stop pretending you're invincible, or this will get worse. He waited until the doctor left. Then he sat in silence, staring at his feet. Cold, lifeless, tingling with the beginnings of a storm he couldn't will away. King Asa died with diseased feet. He didn't ask for help. Chanwoo ran a hand down his face, every muscle tense, jaw locked in defiance. He would not kneel. The penthouse was dark, curtains drawn, phones off. The towering windows that once framed the Seoul skyline now sat covered in shadows, as if the entire city had turned its back on him, and he on it. Chanwoo hadn't left in 4 days. He'd stopped answering calls, ignored every message, even from his legal team. The media had moved on to newer scandals, but the damage remained like smoke after a fire, lingering, clinging, choking everything he touched. He sat in silence, barefoot, staring at the swelling in his legs. His once strong feet were aching now, stiff, heavy, unreliable. The doctor had warned him it would get worse if he kept ignoring treatment. But he couldn't care. The mirror in the corner caught his reflection. Unkempt hair, a loose sweatshirt, hollow eyes. He didn't recognize himself. He blamed Taejun, blamed the shareholders, blamed the investigators, blamed God. But underneath the anger was the worst of it all. He blamed himself. I should have seen it coming. I built this empire. I let it rot, but not once, not even in a whisper, did he pray. Not because he didn't believe, but because he didn't know how to surrender. Then came the knock. 3 firm raps on the door. He didn't move. The knock came again, and then a voice. It's me. He closed his eyes. He should have known. Eirene. He rose, limped toward the door, and cracked it open just enough to show his face. Her eyes softened the moment she saw him. Pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, the proud man reduced to quiet ruins. I'm not doing this, he said hoarsely. Not with you. She raised an eyebrow. Not doing what? The pity, the sermon, the God has a plan speech. He tried to shut the door, but she pressed her hand flat against it. You think I came to preach? He stared at her. I came because I care, she said simply. He shook his head. I don't need a preacher. Good, she said, walking past him as if she'd been invited. Because I'm not here to preach. I'm here to tell you the truth. She stepped into the dim room, her voice echoing slightly in the hollow silence. She glanced around, empty liquor glasses on the table, the Bible she gave him still collecting dust on a shelf. She picked it up, wiped the cover clean. You still haven't opened this, have you? He didn't answer. You've read every business strategy book in the world, but not the only one that could have saved your soul. He sat heavily on the edge of the couch. Eirene, just go. She walked over and sat across from him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, softly, she said, King Asa ruled with strength, but when the battle turned inward, when it was his body failing and his heart hardened, he refused to kneel. He died alone, still proud, still stubborn. She leaned in, voice like a steady fire. You really want to be remembered like that? His throat tightened. His hands curled into fists. I'm not a king, he muttered. You've lived like one. You've ruled your world, built your kingdom. But now that it's falling, what are you ruling, Chan Wu? Broken glass? He looked away, blinking hard. She reached into the Bible, opening it to a marked page, and read aloud, For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth, to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to him. You have done a foolish thing, and from now on you will be at war. 2 Chronicles 16:9. She closed the Bible gently. You've been at war with yourself for years. His voice cracked. You think I don't know that? Then do something about it, she whispered. Stop pretending your strength can save you. It's your pride that's killing you. She left after that. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. And for hours, he sat alone. The silence pressed against his chest like a weight. He limped to the window and looked out. The city still glittered. Life moved on. People lived, laughed, loved. He hadn't done any of those in a long time. His eyes drifted to the Bible on the table. It called to him in a way nothing else ever had. Slowly, he picked it up. His fingers turned the pages to the spot Eirene had left marked. 2 Chronicles 14. He read. He kept reading. The rise of Asa. His victory through faith. His reforms. His trust in God. And then, the shift. Even in his illness, he did not seek help from the Lord, but only from the physicians. 2 Chronicles 16:12. The words hit like a punch. He looked down at his feet, cold, aching, failing. He remembered Eirene's voice again. You're limping now, Chan Wu. Just like Asa. You still gonna pretend you can walk this road alone? The tears came without warning. Sharp, hot, humbling. His pride shattered in silence. He sank to his knees. And for the first time in decades, he prayed. Not elegant, not rehearsed, not full of the right words. Just real. God, if you're still listening, I'm tired. I'm scared. I don't know how to do this without breaking. I don't know how to trust you. But if you'll have me, I want to learn. And the silence afterward felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt held. That night, for the first time in his life, Chan Wu didn't fall asleep thinking about numbers or failure. He fell asleep thinking about mercy. The press called it unexpected. The board called it temporary. The world called it a mystery. But Chan Wu called it peace. Without warning, without a press release, without even a final speech, he stepped away, transferred his CEO title to the interim board, handed over all daily operations, and disappeared. He didn't go to the Maldives or some secret billionaire island. He didn't retreat to Switzerland or flee to a coastal fortress. He stayed in Seoul, quietly, silently, intentionally. No cameras, no suits, no power plays. Just a man learning how to breathe again. He started going to church. Not the towering cathedrals he once mocked, but a small one tucked into a side street near Eirene's outreach center. The sign outside was faded. The pews were chipped. The welcome was warm. The first Sunday he walked in, no one recognized him. He loved that. The pastor was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a voice that didn't perform. The worship team was a single piano and a woman with a slightly off-key but deeply honest voice. The sermon wasn't showy, but every word felt like it pierced something soft in his chest. Eirene sat next to him in the second row. She didn't say anything when he came in, just smiled, slid over, and gently rested her Bible between them. He hadn't touched her hand, not yet, but the nearness was enough. Over the next few weeks, he started doing light physical therapy, changing his diet. But more than that, he started listening to sermons, to scripture, to his own heart. One verse kept playing in his head over and over again, like a gentle whisper stitched into his soul. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Psalm 127, 1. He used to build out of pride. Now he wanted to build out of purpose. At one point, he asked Eirene, "Is it always this hard? Letting go?" She tilted her head and said softly, "It's not hard. It's holy. Holy things just tend to cost us everything we thought we needed." He didn't return to Kang Group in the way people expected. There was no grand announcement, no attempt to reclaim the spotlight. Instead, he redirected his wealth. He started small, launching a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from low-income neighborhoods, partnering with Christian organizations to fund education, supporting shelters, quietly paying off debts for struggling families, not under his name, but anonymously, under a new foundation. The Asa Fund, he called it. When Eirene asked why, he said, "To remind myself what pride built and what grace rebuilt." He began meeting with people, not in glass boardrooms, but in coffee shops and church basements. He listened more than he spoke. He asked people how they were doing, not to network, but because he cared. And one day, when the pastor of the little church asked if he'd share his story, he didn't hesitate. He stood at the front, no script, no title, just a man in a plain shirt, and said, "I used to think power meant never needing help, that needing anyone was weakness, but I bled for years and called it strength. I walked on rotting feet and called it resilience, until one woman told me the truth. And God, merciful, patient God, taught me how to kneel. I'm not who I was, and I don't want to be." There were tears in the room, quiet ones, the kind that only truth draws out. And when he stepped down, Eirene stood beside him. Not everyone understood the change. Some whispered, some questioned, some rolled their eyes and said he was going through a phase. But those who knew him, the assistants, the advisors, the ones who had seen his eyes go sharp and cold for years, they saw the difference. They saw humility where pride used to be. They saw him smile, not because he won something, but because he finally let go. They saw him pray, and they saw him fall in love. After a quiet dinner, late one evening, dim light, soft silence between them. He stared down at the empty mug in his hands, thumb circling the rim like the question had been forming for weeks. Then, without looking up, he asked quietly, "Back then, what did you really see when you looked at me?" Eirene glanced at him, her eyes soft but steady. She didn't rush to answer, didn't try to make it easy. Finally, she spoke. "The world called you the Iron Phantom, swollen with pride, deaf to wisdom, colder than the empire you worshipped. He flinched slightly, but she continued. Calm, true. And they weren't wrong. You were proud, distant, obsessed with building something that could never love you back. A pause. The silence between them thick with memory. Then her voice softened. But I also saw a man trying to outrun his own wounds. A man who built walls instead of altars, and forgot he was allowed to kneel. His eyes met hers, full, vulnerable, breaking just a little. I never believed that was all you were, Chan-woo, she whispered. And I think part of you was hoping someone would see past the steel. He didn't speak. He just reached for her hand. And for once, he didn't have to say thank you. Time passed, but not the way the world counted it. There were no headlines announcing their relationship, no social media posts, no glittering events or diamond-studded red carpets. Instead, there were quiet mornings, shared prayers, soft laughter, and the slow rebuilding of two hearts and one that had learned how to lean on God first. Chan-woo didn't propose after a grand romantic gesture. He didn't sweep Eirene off her feet or plan a symphony under fireworks. That wasn't them. Their love wasn't loud, it was rooted. They started walking together after church, down tree-lined back streets, past parks where children laughed, and into cafes with chipped mugs and soft gospel music playing in the background. They talked about everything, and sometimes they said nothing at all. It was during one of those walks that she nudged him gently with her elbow and said with a smile, "Still a little stubborn, King Asa." He looked over, amused, a rare warmth in his eyes. "Not as stubborn as I used to be." She tilted her head. Maybe. But I still catch you trying to carry the weight on your own sometimes." He chuckled under his breath. "Old habits die hard. And old hearts can live again," she replied softly. One evening, as they sat side by side on the wooden bench outside her outreach center, the city lights blinking slowly to life, he turned to her with something deep and uncertain stirring behind his eyes. "Do you think people like me," he began slowly, voice rough with the weight of old shame, "can really change?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, warm, calloused, trembling just slightly. "Only when they finally stop limping on their own," she whispered, "and let God carry them." A silence settled between them, not empty, but full of healing, of gratitude, of that deep soul recognition that only comes when two people have walked through the fire together and come out whole. They never rushed. There was no need. Some nights, Chan-woo would pray out loud, awkwardly at first, fumbling over his words, but with a sincerity that melted something in Eirene's chest every time. Other nights, she would rest her head on his shoulder while he read scripture aloud, voice steady, no longer the cold CEO who barked orders, but the man who had learned to kneel before his king. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Isaiah 40:29. One night, she leaned into him after he finished reading and said, "You know, you're kind of irresistible when you quote the Bible." He gave a soft laugh. "Don't start." But his heart was full. Their love wasn't built on sparks or spectacle. It was built on surrender, on grace that showed up day after day, on forgiveness, on shared faith, not on each other alone, but on the God who brought them together. Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Ecclesiastes 4:12. That verse became theirs because they had walked through ruin, through pride, through pain, and they had come out with something unshakable, a love anchored not in perfection, but in redemption. Years later, people would ask them how it all happened, how the feared titan of soul fell in love with the missionary from across the world. And Chan-woo would smile, shake his head, and say with absolute calm, "I didn't fall in love, I was rescued into it." And Eirene, she'd glance at him, grin, and whisper in his ear, "Still a little stubborn, King Asa." And he'd squeeze her hand. "I know, but now I've got someone to walk with me, and a God who carries me when I can't." Their wedding wasn't held in a cathedral. There were no violins, no flower arches, no headlines screaming about the billionaire's surprise ceremony. Just a small chapel with wooden pews that creaked gently when people sat. Sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows, painting soft hues of amber and violet across the aisle. Only close friends came. A few members of Eirene's outreach team, a couple of the young entrepreneurs Chanwoo now mentored. The pastor from their tiny church stood at the altar, smiling like a man who had watched something rare bloom slowly in the dark. Eirene walked down the aisle, wearing a simple cream dress, soft fabric swaying around her ankles. No veil, no diamonds, just a small white flower tucked into her braided bun and a Bible in her hands. When she reached him, Chanwoo looked up with a kind of reverence in his eyes that went deeper than love. He wore no tie, just a clean, open-collar shirt and a silver ring on a chain around his neck, the one she had given him weeks earlier. He had kept it close every day. The ring wasn't flashy. It was engraved with a single verse. "He has made everything beautiful in its time." Ecclesiastes 3:11. There were no vows, not traditional ones. When it was time, the pastor turned to them and simply asked, "Would either of you like to say anything?" Eirene smiled and stepped forward first. "I used to ask God to send someone who would love me gently," she said, voice steady. "But instead, he sent me someone who needed to be loved back to life. And I didn't know it then, but that was the better gift. Because God isn't just a healer, he's a builder. And he rebuilt you right in front of me." She looked at Chanwoo with tears in her eyes, the corners of her mouth trembling slightly. "And I'm honored to love the man God built." Then Chanwoo spoke. He didn't hold a paper. He didn't look at anyone else. Only her. "I spent most of my life believing I had to carry everything alone. That needing someone, needing God, was weakness." He paused, voice growing quieter. "But then I collapsed. And he didn't just let me fall. He caught me. Through you." He pulled the ring from his chain and held it in his palm. "I've failed more times than I can count. But this time, I want to build something right, something real, something on the rock." He took a breath. "I don't just love you. I trust what God is doing through us." And then, with trembling hands, he slid the ring onto her finger. No audience applause, no fireworks, just the hush of holy ground. The pastor didn't raise his voice. He just smiled and said, "What God has joined together, let no one separate." Matthew 19:6. They bowed their heads, and he prayed. When they finally turned to face each other again, there was no rush to kiss, no camera flashes waiting. Just one quiet moment. And then he whispered, "You're still going to call me King Asa, aren't you?" Eirene grinned. "Always." He leaned in and kissed her. Outside the chapel, the world went on. Taxis honked. Children shouted in the park. Seoul breathed its usual chaos. But inside, two people began a life together, not with thrones, but with truth, with peace, and with the God who had carried them through it all. The end.